Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the first night of pre-conference keynotes for the second Homeschool Plus conference. We just heard from Oliver DeMille, and that was fascinating, and I'm loving the diversity of keynote speakers we have this year. Jerry is the sort of our what can I say? I was going to say the Godfather, but that's not going to be the right phrase. Jerry is our guiding mentor in this endeavor. So delighted to have Jerry here. Welcome, Jerry.
Okay. Well, Steve.
Don't start yet.
Okay. Let's start.
Thanks to Homeschool Life and G3 for helping to sponsor the conference. This is a Learning Revolution project. We sure hope you'll go to learningrevolution.com and check out the other conferences that we hold. We're also holding a terrific film festival this month. It's at the Alternative Education Film Festival at altedfilmfest.com. You'll see it at the front of the Homeschool Conference website. And thanks always to Blackboard Collaborate for this platform. So we have a live audience. Those of you who are in the live audience, you can let us know where you're participating from by clicking on the star to the left of the map, and then click on the map. And then if you would type in the chat where you are specifically in the world, and maybe the time and temperature. I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, and it is 8:00 p.m. and it's nice and warm still.
Okay, so that's where people are, huh?
So we have somebody from India, it looks like. Jerry, you're in Long Island?
Okay. So as the people come on, we see them on the map, and I can see their names on this also. Is that right?
Yeah, if they put their note there. Piyush is at 5:30 in the morning from India. Welcome.
Yeah.
Massachusetts, New Hampshire.
Okay. Nice.
Phoenix, California. Well, please keep those coming. I'm going to move forward here, turn the time over to Jerry. Jerry, the slide is for you. Let us know what you'd like to do here.
Okay, well, I think what I'm going to do is I'll talk a little bit about what Arrow is and the IDEC that I just came back from. Let me see. Okay, so this is interesting. It's not the one I wanted. Okay. Okay, I guess I'll have to use it. Hold on. Okay, so my name is Jerry Mintz, and I just came back from Korea from the International Democratic Education Conference. I'm the director of the Alternative Education Resource Organization, and what we do is we are maybe the primary networker of educational alternatives around the world. So that means that we help people find each other. We help people who are looking for alternatives, that is parents, teachers, students on all levels, elementary through college. And we also help people start new schools and new alternatives. So, for example, we have every year a school starters course. And if you go to our website, which is educationrevolution.org, you will see some of the things that we offer along those lines. So you go to our resources and you'll see our school starters course. You'll see our map of our member schools. You'll see a map of the schools that we've helped people to start. And you'll see, okay, so there is our website. That's nice. And if you go to that website, educationrevolution.org, you'll see a list of member schools. you'll see a list of schools that we helped to start, a map of the schools that we helped to start, as well as a map of democratic schools. So these are all the some of the things that you can see. There's a lot of, there are also videos that you can look at. I've got a couple of TEDx talks you can look at. We have one by Sir Kenneth Robinson, which is really kind of cool, because he was the keynote of one of our conferences. And that's another thing that we do every year. We do have conferences, and we had one just recently, a month ago, and had about 300 people from 30 states and provinces and 7 countries and so on. It was quite interesting. And we do have DVDs and we have the CDs of those presentations. So these are all things that we offer. So every, well, I guess I'm going to go back to 1993. And in 1993, we had a meeting in Israel on multiculturalism, and then somebody who had started a democratic school in Israel pulled us together, the ones who were involved with democratic schools, and there were about a dozen of us, and we'd never really kind of gotten together as a group before. The next year, one of the people who was from England had a second gathering like that, and so all of a sudden we realized it was a movement. And then the next year there was one in Austria, and so I've been to about 18 of them in different parts of the world since then, and the one that we had this year was in Korea. And in a lot of places that we've gone to, the reason why we've located the meetings where we have is partly to help the people in those countries. For example, in the late 1990s, Summerhill School, which is one of the pioneering democratic schools in the world, started over 90 years ago, was under attack by the education department in England. And we had the IDEC at Summerhill School. And one of the reasons was to try to support them. So it was quite an incredible story. If you go to the Summerhill website, and we are linked to it from our site, if you go there, you'll actually be able to get a link to a 4-part drama that was made on BBC talking about what happened, where they didn't like the idea that Summerhill students didn't have to go to classes if they didn't want to, that it was up to them, it was their choice. And so that was the philosophy of A.S. Neal, who started the school. And so they decided to make an example of Summerhill and try to close it down. Summerhill decided to fight back and got help from supporters all over the world and brought the government to court, and they won. And in the final scene, it was amazing. After they'd really made their point so well that the government realized they had to withdraw their case, they said to Summerhill they wanted to withdraw it, and Summerhill said, well, we have to have a meeting about this, but to decide if we are willing to accept this or just fight to the finish. And they actually had a Summerhill meeting in the courts of London with a 14-year-old girl sitting in the judge's seat chairing the meeting. And it was incredible. And I was thinking at the time, boy, they should make a movie out of this, and in fact they did. And you can find that on the Summerhill site. And since that time, Summerhill has been pretty much protected. And one of the things that happens, if they are inspected, and they had sent a SWAT team of inspectors, 8, to try to close the school down. If they are inspected again, and they have been inspected since then, they have to have somebody representing Summerhill that basically inspects the inspectors and makes sure that they understand the philosophy of the school. So as a result, partly by having the IDEC there, Summerhill was saved and still exists, and I've visited many, many times. I should say I am an official, very, very part-time table tennis teacher at Summerhill. Like every year or two when I go by on my way somewhere, I teach for 2 or 3 days. And this year I did a TEDx talk in Norway, and I stopped there on my way back. So, so that's one example of why we've located the IDECs where we have. Another example is in 2005, we had the IDEC in Germany. And in Germany, homeschooling is not legal, and at that time, democratic schools were not legal. So they were actually arresting people if they were homeschooling or had democratic schools. In fact, there's somebody who recently, in the last few years, left Germany because the government was going to try to take their kids away because they were homeschooling, and they got asylum from Germany in the United States, much to the embarrassment of the German government, and they've sort of been fighting it since then, but that's the last I've heard. So, so that was in 2005. We had that IDEC there. On the last day of that IDEC, we went to one of the most prestigious universities in Germany, and many people were presenters that day to the public and to the press. And I think that in some ways that presentation legitimized what we were doing, what people were doing who had democratic schools. About 6 or 7 years later, we had an IDEC in England, and 1/3 of the participants were actually from democratic schools in Germany. So there are lots of them now. So this is the kind of effect that we'd like to have. So this year, the IDEC was in Korea. And the interesting thing is Korea has this reputation for having a good educational system, but that system is very rigid, just like the one in Japan. We also did the same thing when we went to Japan in 2000. And because of that rigidity, there have sprung up in Korea 200 or 300 democratic schools, and I should say 200 or 300 mostly illegal schools that are not approved or registered with the state or with the government. But the interesting thing is the government so far has turned a blind eye to it. They sort of ignored it. They haven't decided they wanted to take on that fight. And quite frankly, I was skeptical when I went to Korea as to whether or not they would actually have true democratic schools. And I should maybe just stop for a second and tell you what I'm talking about with a democratic school. And I'm talking about learner-centered education, meaning that the education is based on the interest of the student rather than a top-down curriculum. And this is crucial, I think, for people to survive in this millennium. And now, you know, brain research has shown without any doubt that children are natural learners. That's something that's kind of self-evident, you would think. But the trouble is that our regular system isn't based on that idea. It's sort of based on the idea that kids are naturally lazy and need to be forced to learn. Well, in that situation, if you do force them to learn things they are not interested in for 7 years or so, or more, I mean 12 years, but after 7, you've pretty much extinguished that inherent natural ability to learn, and that just then it becomes a self-fulfilling thing. It looks as if that paradigm is accurate. The kids need to be forced to learn, and therefore you would need competition, you would need grades, you would need homework. All those things are not needed if you understand that kids are natural learners, if you understand that. So, so that is the idea behind democratic education and alternative education and learner-centered education and holistic education. So, 200 schools, at least, in Korea have been created because of that concept. And so this was a meeting that included a lot of the people who are from those schools. There were about 500 people at this IDEC. And a lot of them were kids. And there were a lot of kids and graduates of democratic schools who were on the organizing committee that created this meeting. The interesting thing is this meeting was done in conjunction with the city where it was held. And that city, the mayor, was very involved with this and used city funds that basically provided the IDEC with a meeting place in the municipal auditorium, basically. And there was a school right behind it, and that's where a lot of the workshops were. Not only that, he provided funding so that they could bring some participants there from third world countries. And so, for example, there were a couple of people who were there from Nepal, about 5 actually, from 2 different schools. One of them, we had helped him go to 2 previous IDECs a long time ago. And I think it's in 2005 and 6 in India and in Australia, respectively. The interesting thing is I teach a lot of ping pong. I like teaching it because, among other things, I know how to teach it really well, and particularly for beginners. And kids who can learn can realize that they are natural learners and get confidence in themselves as learners in a kind of a non-threatening, non-academic sort of way. It's one of the reasons why I like to teach it. So I taught this one kid just in these 2 conferences. And he got a scholarship. He was from an orphanage, and he was an orphan and had come to this Sri Aurobindo orphanage outside of Kathmandu in Nepal. And when he was 3 years old. And by the way, this is now 7 years from that time. He actually is now in university, and he was the number 2 ping pong player in his university. Number 1 was in the top 10 in Nepal. That's how good he got. And I got a chance to play him there, and we played very evenly. I was able to squeak out a victory, but he's gotten very, very good. And we actually brought some clothes from here to give to him and a girl who came who's a dancer, and I think she's basically professional now, who are both kind of graduates of the Sri Aurobindo Ashram orphanage. So at one point there was a big protest organized because, and that's the picture that you can see up there, because in Korea, some legislator had proposed a new law that would force these schools to register, which would also pretty much end the philosophy that they've been able to follow. So they decided to organize a big protest about it, and it was an amazing thing. It started out, I saw a couple of kids, I was there, and there were a couple of kids that were rapping in Korea about this whole thing. And then there was a group of drummers from different schools, and performing different kinds of amazing rhythms. And then they started to interview some of us, and you can see in the front row there, there's somebody from Japan, somebody from New Zealand, somebody from England. Those were some of the people who were talking and who had come to the IDEC and who talked about supporting these schools rather than regulating them. And I said that they needed to be nurtured rather than regulated, and maybe that people could learn from them. And obviously there was something that was needed and there was interested in, because there were now hundreds of them. And this was covered. You can see it was covered by the main, I guess probably the #1 network in Korea, and also by a couple of the top newspapers, and they did stories about them that were in the next day's paper. And so we're hoping that with this kind of support, that they will be able to continue what they're doing. See, this is a worldwide movement. Again, if you go to our website, you can go to a list of democratic schools, and you'll see that there are hundreds of these schools. And this is just ones that we know of. For example, we don't know the names or websites or whatever of most of the ones in Korea. I've got a few that I will be posting because they gave the information to me. But of course, for some of them, they're underground. And this is not just true there. It's true in South America. Somebody did a whole documentary, and he couldn't show much of anything because most of these new schools are underground. Same thing in Spain and in Japan. So it's a big movement, and it's a big movement because it's natural for people to understand that kids are natural learners. Children are natural learners. People are. That's how they're born. If you've ever seen any 3 or 4 or 5-year-old these days, you know it's true. So anyway, I had a great time. I just got back 2 days ago. I'm still jet lagged. It's a long trip. It's interesting, on the plane that I took, I was wondering what kind of airline is Korean Air going to be. Well, I was really surprised because I was in this huge plane that in the back of the plane they have a boutique where people can go and shop and pick up duty-free stuff. But I mean, it's an actual boutique with all these displays. And then there's a circular staircase that goes up to the 2nd floor where about 90 people were in business class, about almost 400 on the whole plane. I was just amazed. Then when I went there, I stayed with a Korean family. And I was the first Westerner to stay at their house, and I had a fantastic time. I even managed to adapt after a couple of days to the way the beds are, because the beds are just wooden slabs with kind of this much of a futon type thing on them, not what Westerners are used to. And I had a great time. I actually taught a couple of the kids at a local table tennis club, and a lot of people came over to say hi. So that was kind of neat. And then so I think that overall this was quite an amazing experience in Korea. And there were other presenters. I mean, I did a presentation. I did a keynote. I did one of the first ones. And the very first keynote, I believe, was done by Chris Bacagliano, who had been the head of Albany Free School for many years. And Albany Free School is over 40 years old. And Chris has written several books. He just wrote a book called The School Must Have a Heart. And it's interesting. He started by talking about this this terrible tragedy that they had there with the capsizing of this ferry with hundreds of kids dying. But he had an interesting point to make. And that was that when this boat was capsizing, they told all the kids from the schools that were there to go back to their rooms and stay there. That's what they told them. And they did. And they died. 70% of them, something like that, died. And the ones that didn't listen, and the ones that used logic and reasoning and said, I don't care what you tell me, I'm going to go up and I'm going to jump in the water, I'm going to be on deck, they lived. And that was part of Chris's point, that you have to be able to think, not just follow orders. And does this ring a bell to some people? Because it did for me as soon as I heard it. The same thing happened with the World Trade Center. People were told not to move, to stay put after that first plane crashed into it. Now, it just happened that my mother's boyfriend's son happened to be there, and he had actually been there when the World Trade Center a bomb was set off there 7 or 8 years earlier. He immediately discarded and disagreed with that thing and told everybody in his office to get out immediately. Didn't listen to what people said to stay put. And they lived. And they lived. So I think that was Chris's point, one of the points when he started, is that the kind of education we're talking about teaches kids, teaches children, teaches people to think for themselves. And that was the point of his talk, and it was very, very powerful. I did my keynote that afternoon, and I asked them to find about 10 kids to come on the stage, and they brought up 10 kids from one of the Democratic schools, and they were about 8 or 9 years old, something like that. Could have been younger, but no more than 9, maybe 8, 7. And what I demonstrated with them is something that I call organic curriculum. And I asked them to brainstorm any kind of question that they were curious about the answer to. Just anything that came to their mind. Nothing censored. Nothing's considered stupid. Anything. And then afterwards we would just go through and vote and decide which ones we wanted to talk about. So one of the most popular ones was, why were Democratic schools started? And then we started to discuss them, and the kids were talking about why they thought they were started. And of course, they talked about how the problems they'd had in their previous schools. There was bullying. It was boring. So on. And that was a nice discussion. Now, one of the girls there had put up as her question something like, why am I human, or am I human? Am I human? And we asked each of the kids to say, well, why did you put that question there? And she started to answer it, and she started to break down in tears. And she said that in her previous school, she was bullied and teased, and even people called her pig. And she just wondered, why that was. And that was where her question came from, am I human? And it was amazing when you consider that this exercise that I did was in 2 languages. I didn't speak Korean. What the kids said had to be translated. I had to write it down. What I had to say had to be translated. Went back, and still, it had this kind of power. It brought this out, and the audience was pretty transfixed and pretty amazed by this process. It's interesting. Afterwards, one mother came up to me, and she said, "How can I have confidence? How can I be sure this is going to be working?" And I said, you probably can't, because most of us, on a gut level, we were raised in a different way. We were kind of told that learning has to be painful, and you have to do all this stuff to go through all this stuff that's boring. And so we have to fight in ourselves this tendency to be skeptical, to question whether it's working, to be worried about it. We have to constantly fight that. But we need to fight that because it will work. And I'll tell you, I've demonstrated democratic process all over the world, and I've demonstrated organic curriculum. And every time that I do, I am shocked and amazed at what it brings out, at the power of it. It reminded me of an interesting story. We hosted the IDEC in 2003 in New York. We had 600 people from 28 countries and at least that many states. It was quite amazing. And afterwards, people went back to New York City and they said, "How come we don't have a democratic school? We need to start one." We had some meetings, one to try to start one as part of the public schools, and one to start one as an independent school. The public school one, we made a very, very nice proposal to the New York City school system, which just sat on some bureaucrat's desk, basically. The one for independent school gave rise to Brooklyn Free School, which just celebrated its 10th birthday. But in the year before that, we had meetings every couple of weeks in somebody's apartment. And and I would encourage people to bring the children, and they were, but then the kids would usually run off and play by themselves. And one of those meetings, there were 3 kids who came. They were 6 years old, and they went off to play. And I said, you bring the kids to these meetings, but we don't listen to them. Whether you know it or not, they have opinions. They have an opinion on how the school should run. So they said, well, let's bring them in. So we brought those 3 kids in. And when they realized that we knew they had opinions, and we asked them what they thought this school should be like, one of the 6-year-olds said, "It's very important that the school not be too clean. If it's too clean, if it's got nice new furniture, you can't run around and play and have fun. Everybody's going to be worried about the furniture and how clean it is." And the interesting thing was, of course, he was right. But I don't know which adult was going to think about that. I don't know which one was going to realize that. So it's amazing sometimes when the power of some of these things and what it brings out. And I can give you so many examples, but I'll just tell you one other story that's interesting. I told you about Yaakov Hecht, who had started the Democratic School of Hadera in Israel. And at one point, he had a student come to him. And all he was interested in was windsurfing. Wasn't interested in anything else. Windsurfing. So Yaakov said, "Okay, fine. Your entire curriculum is going to be based on windsurfing. You'll read about the history, the design, the physics. Everything will be to do with windsurfing, and you can windsurf as much as you want." So that's what he did. That's what he did. And the interesting thing is, Israel has only had one gold medal in the Olympics, ever. And that was won by this kid in windsurfing. So you never know what's going to happen. It's interesting. I met Chris's publisher, Chris Mercoliano, at this meeting, and Tae-Wook Ha, who organized the meeting, and he's a Korean who spent some time getting his doctorate in England, is back in Korea, and helped organize this conference. And he's a professor, and he's actually a professor teaching alternative education. I think the only one that has a department of alternative education in Korea. And I would think that these two people, the publisher who's been translating alternative education books for 20 years, and Tae, that those two people have really fomented this whole revolution in Korea. It's interesting to just see this, and you can point to this. Later in the week, I did a workshop for school starters. Now this, as I said, is something that we specialize in, and you can see on our website the course. We have two different things. We have a full course that starts in September and goes to January. And then in between the courses, people can access it, but it's unguided. The regular course is guided step by step, your vision, the legalities, how to organize in your community, things like that. So I had a workshop for school starters. Interesting, there was one that wanted to do something for real little kids, for basically kindergarten. There's another one wanted to do something on a college level. Another one wanted to do something for kids in between, age 17 and 21. Somebody wanted to do a program for schools that he was involved when they were teaching English as a second language. It was quite a variety of people there, and we went through each one step by step. It's interesting, the one, the kindergarten one, reminded me that at one point we had started a school in New Jersey, and they asked me to go over there and demonstrate democratic process there. So I said, fine. And on my way over, I realized that the oldest student there was going to be 5 years old. And as I said before, you know, I'm skeptical sometimes of this whole process on a gut level. And I thought, wow, I'm going to have to at least come up with the agenda for them. They're not going to understand. And I walked in, and the 2.5-year-old was screaming, "Mommy!" And I thought, oh, wow, I don't know how this is going to work. And then all these kids sat around a round table, and I said to them, and I started the process, that in your meeting, you want to talk about something that could be a problem in the school, or something that's a good idea for the school. No sooner did I get those words out of my mind, out of my mouth, but all the hands went up. Wow. One of the kids said that he thought it was a problem that when kids were sick, they were still going outside. In the end, the meeting discussed this and decided that if you have a cold, you can't go out in the cold. And then there was a 4-year-old girl who said that she'd heard that chocolate had a caffeine-like substance in it, and she thought maybe it would be a good idea to not have kids eat it after lunch. And this was discussed, and that was passed. And the 2.5-year-old said to his mother that he wanted the school to buy a fighting suit for their costumes. And so they discussed this and decided they would see how much it cost. And then a couple of months later, when I was visiting, he came up to me and he said, we found it, you know, at a store, and we bought it. So, so this taught me a lot about how young you can actually start the democratic process. It's amazing. So anyway, if people are interested in our online course, it's coming up, as I said. You can find out about it on our website. And it's not full yet. We only take 25 people. It's going to start at the end of September. We only take 25 people in the course. There were people there from, I think this year, from about 20 countries. And one of them is the Aero representative in China. And she talked about what's happening in China, and there's some interesting things going on there. And I think that, you know, it was, the whole experience was fantastic. One of the people who was there was Zoe Redhead's son, Henry. Now, Zoe is the daughter of A.S. Neal, so this was A.S. Neal's grandson, the person who started Summerhill. And he gave a talk on what I mentioned earlier about what Summerhill went through. And in fact, they put me on a panel, and the panel was all about legislation and, you know, what kind of legislation there is, the laws, how people would deal with them in different countries. And it's a very important aspect of what we do, because we want to see laws that support learner-centered education, but you're fighting against a very entrenched establishment in all over the world that basically doesn't understand this. They're operating from a different paradigm, and they just don't get it. Well, I could go on. I've got lots and lots of stories, but I think I want to stop at this point to see if there's some questions. So if people have some questions, and I'm not positive how this is going to operate, but I would be happy to answer them. I'm looking at some of the people that are on here. Let's see. I see a couple of things. I'm not sure what to do about them. What should I do?
Piyush is asking where to find the training course on the website.
Yeah, where to find it?
I'm assuming.
Okay, so as you go to the website, you'll see a section of resources, and it's under there, and it says School Starters course, 2 or 3 places down on the drop-down menu, and you'll see the syllabus and everything. And by the way, this is the first year that we actually can give credit. Antioch, New England University, it will offer credit as an option. You don't have to take it for credit, but you can get credit if you're interested in that and taking this School Starters course this year. Anything else on there?
So Peggy found the link and posted it there.
Yep.
Marie was asking, how do you use the democratic model at home?
Well, you know, that's interesting, because I homeschooled my niece, and she wrote a book about it called My Life as a Traveling Homeschooler. Well, she talks about the meetings that we had in the house. Sometimes there were just 3 of us, or, you know, sometimes it was my mother and her and me. And she tells in her books, which she wrote, by the way, at the age of 10. She tells in the book about one meeting, and in this meeting, it started out with an argument about television, you know, and she said that I wanted to see something, she wanted to see something, and we were disagreeing about it, and so, and at one point, I reflected to her what I thought was her point of view, and then I asked her to reflect what I was saying, and she just made fun of me, and I got upset about that, and then she got upset that I was upset, and she ran out of the meeting and went in her room, and then she writes in her thing, and then I came out and I saw poor Uncle Jerry trying to have a meeting by himself, so I figured I'd better get over it and help him finish the meeting. And so we did, and then later on she was talking about why all this came up in her, and it's because that day was the first time that we'd met homeschoolers from Long Island, where we live, and she discovered that they could be nice to each other. And so then she wondered all this time, if they could be nice, why were kids mean to her in school? And it just brought all that stuff up in her. And that's where some of this anger came from. And one of the things she pointed out is that if you get angry in school, they just they make you stay after school. They just punish you for it. So that was an example of a meeting that we had in our home. And I think people can do meetings anywhere. In fact, there's a Boys and Girls Club where I teach table tennis, and we run that democratically. And it's interesting that in that club, it's a regular authoritarian Boys and Girls Club. But the decisions that run that club are made democratically. The students elect their own representatives, or their own supervisors, as they call them, and they actually run this thing 6 days a week. I'm just there a couple of days as a volunteer for a couple of hours. And one of the things I've learned about that is that you can do democratic process anywhere. You can do it in your classroom. You can do it in an authoritarian place like the Boys and Girls Club. You can do it in your home. You can do it anywhere. And the keys are that whatever you can, it's perfectly okay to say, well, we can't make a decision about that because that's the club rule or something, or that's state law or whatever. It's fine to say those things. But as long as the decisions that are actually made are made by the participants, then it works. As soon as somebody vetoes something and says, no, no, you can't do that, your meeting's over, because it's a very fragile thing. So that's how that process works. Any other questions?
Feel free to put a question in the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand. Jerry, I'm interested in how Arrow went this year.
The Arrow Conference? The content of the Arrow Conference this year was incredible. And this was the first year in which we professionally videotaped all the keynotes, 8 of them. And we also professionally did audio of 27 of the workshops. And they were just amazing things. We had Ramchandra come from Nepal. He is the founder of that ashram orphanage that I told you about. And he talked about how it came about, how he ran away when he was 12 years old to India because he just didn't see any prospects for himself in Nepal, school-wise or whatever. He was in a rural area. He ran away and educated himself in India, wound up in Auroville at the Sri Aurobindo ashram there. Sri Aurobindo was the sort of John Dewey of India. And so he learned French, he learned English, he educated himself, and then after 20 years, he went back to Nepal. And what he discovered was incredible poverty. He saw his family for the first time in 20 years. And he saw this poverty and decided to start an orphanage for all the kids on the street he saw. Now he takes care of over 160 kids. In some cases, their mothers are there too, but he has other staff members, other people helping. And they're in 3 locations. And the amazing thing is nobody pays for those kids. The ashram is 90% self-supporting. They have their own cows, 50 cows. They sell the excess milk to Kathmandu. They make pashmina, which is a kind of a cloth from the soft underskin, under hair of sheep. They make their own incense. They have guests that come there and they teach them yoga, and all of this supports them. They have a second location that grows a lot of their own food, although they grow them in every place. They grow them right there, and they also have a bigger one. And then there's a third place they're starting, which is going to actually be for tourists up in the mountains, and that will have some of the graduates running it of the place. And that will be, again, supporting what they do. So that he told the story of how this. He showed slides of the whole thing. That's just one example. Another example is Justo Mendez Aramburu came from Puerto Rico. Justo told his incredible story about how his daughter died in a car accident when she was 15. And he was devastated. He was destroyed. His life felt like it was over. And then his daughter came to him in a dream and said, "You're going to start a school for the most difficult kids in Puerto Rico." And his wife said to him, "You know what? You better listen to her. She knows she's serious when she says something." And so he went ahead. The interesting thing is the graduation for the school is on his daughter's birthday. And they started it. And I'll give you an example of how unusual the school is. These are tough kids, former gang members, you name it. Girls that are pregnant or had children. And you know that the way when they come into the school every day, they hug and kiss every kid. That just gives you an idea. The school was so successful that the government gave up on 4 other schools and gave them to run. It's incredible. So he talked about actually how he had put this together, and that was another keynote. And Ron Miller, who is really kind of almost the father of modern holistic education, who actually started popularizing the word again and the whole concept, written many books about it, he came out of retirement to do a presentation on holistic education. And then Brooklyn Free School did a workshop on how they empower the students there, and particularly how they encourage diversity, because more than half of their students are minority, and they have, for the kids there, they have sliding scale tuition in order for that to happen. So this was just an example, and we have all these on, if you go to our website, you'll see, or to our bookstore on the website, you'll see that we have all of these workshops, all of these keynotes on DVD and video and CD.
Jerry, we probably have time for one more question. And Marie was asking if you could recommend some books for someone just starting to become familiar with this. What books would they be?
Well, you know, if you go to the website to our bookstore, you'll see an awful lot. It really depends on what you want. For example, Chris Mercoliano has a book, How to Grow a School, which we use in our School Starters course. That's an important one. I wrote a book called No Homework and Recess All Day, which is a fairly simple book and a good way to kind of get an overview on all that. And then there's another book that we published called Turning Points, in which we asked 35 visionaries in education to talk about their own education, what was their epiphany, what do they do about it, what are they doing now? And people like John Gatto, you know, Herb Cole, a tremendous group of people responded to this and wrote chapters for us. So those are 3 really terrific books to look at.
Jerry, let's close there. I'm clapping for you.
Yeah.
I think we had a little better technology tonight than we did last year.
Yes. So people can go to educationrevolution.org, and you can actually write to me from there too. If you go to contact, the email will get to me.
Perfect. Thanks for all you do, Jerry. Thanks for being here on our first evening. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to turn off the recording. We do have to have you exit the room for the recording to process. That recording will be up in a few minutes, and then the YouTube version will be up sometime tomorrow. Take care.
All right.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.